When Skrillex released Quest for Fire, I was super excited to grab my laptop and see if I could make something that felt as bold as what I just heard. I basically wanted to capture the experience I had all into one musical piece. So here's what I did. I handed over to Splice to see if I could find any interesting vocals and drum samples to begin sketching out an idea. And I came across this one particular vocal loop and breakbeat that I really liked.
Ain't nothing in this world that's stopping me. My Rari outruns your Odyssey.
Now, the phrasing of the vocal felt similar to what we may hear in a Skrillex song like Tears, but I felt the tone could be a bit darker, so I added Manipulator, which takes care of this by adding this weird vocal layer that plays an octave lower.
Ain't nothing in this world that's stopping me. My Rari outruns your Odyssey.
And I also felt like we could better articulate the rhythm of the breakbeat, which is why I added this percussion groove and this distorted head.
Ain't nothing in this world that's stopping me. My Rari outruns your...
Now, after playing the vocal and percussion elements as an intro loop, I wanted to jump straight into action by introducing an element that provides a strong contrast to our vocal intro loop. So I started messing in Serum, selecting the triangle sub, the basic MG and E vowel oscillators, after which I chose the bandpass 12 filter and started tweaking the LFO1 envelope, assigning it to several knobs like the levels of the sub and vowel oscillators as well as the filter cutoff. And through the specific shape I drew in the LFO window, I wanted to make sure that as we play a note, the bass synth gradually reveals its character and drive. So I felt quite good about this synth, but I still took a few more steps to get it to the finish line. To add some extra attack and punch, I assigned LFO2 to the master tune, almost like a pitch bend. I then wanted our synth to feel more harmonic, which is why I increased oscillator A by 3 semitones. And by doing that, we basically add a minor third to our synth, which would sound like this on a piano. And finally, to greatly increase the atmosphere, I linked our bass to a reverb send, which is being automated so that the reverb only fades in once the bass synth stops playing. And this creates a really tight sound as we prevent the dry and wet signals from being played together. So we're using this growling bass shot to grab our listeners' attention, and I felt it would be great to add in some drums as well as a heavy sub at this point. For the drums, I'm using the percussion groove we presented during the intro, this kick from Splice, a rim shot, and a snare playing on every third beat, and a closed hi-hat pattern for some extra movement. And for the sub, I'm using the sub disc perk preset from Serum's default bass folder, which comes with this really cool noise layer that just adds some extra grit and character to our sub. Now, very importantly, I'm automating the volume level of this noise layer to add some movement, and most of all because I didn't want it to interfere with our growling bass shot. So I made sure it's at 0 every time the bass shot is played. Now, to make this section more interesting, I did a couple of different things. First, the pitch of oscillator A for the growl is different each time it is being played. Second, our breakbeat has this ever-increasing formant through an automation clip, allowing for a transitional effect between the first and second parts of our drop. Third, there are pitch bends on our sub bass here and there, making things less repetitive. And fourth, I'm introducing this Noisia hi-hat loop in the second half of this section for some extra variation. Now, during this second half of the opening drop, I am also introducing a new element into our song structure, which is this specific vocal chant loop that I felt embodied the specific vibe we're after. And I'm also adding some unique duplicates of the vocal chant, which I'm pitching up and down to create some harmonies. And finally, I'm also adding in this staccato vocal sample that accentuates the vocal melody we created before. Now, as we're progressing through the opening, I wanted to differentiate from the familiar growl synth shot we've been hearing every 4 bars. So I inserted this color-based chord patch from the Oliver pack on Splice. And this synth is playing quite a few notes, which is why I had to consolidate this track to a WAV file. And I'm also doing a little trick with an EQ here by increasing and then moving the resonance of the chord with an automation clip, which kind of adds this short top melody consisting of the notes A sharp and C. I then wanted to shift the pace and create something that would act as an intermission between our opening drop and our second climax. And the idea was to find something that felt atmospheric and a bit soothing, so I began playing these simple chords in Contact's Retro Machines library. I then laid on top this arpeggiated melody for which I'm using the asterisms preset found in the Jupiter 8 emulation by Arturia. And I'm gradually opening up this synth and chords by introducing a low-pass filter that slowly brings in our elements, rather than coming in too hot from the beginning, which allows for things to cool down and signify we've approached our verse. And these elements, through their automations, lead us to the second half of the verse, which has quite a bit of action as we are reintroducing the growl, the sub, the vocal chant, the kick, and the percussion elements. And together they create a huge contrast versus the more calm opening of the verse. And what also adds movement to this is the automation happening on our ARP, which continually fades in and out in between each of the growl hits. Which are, by the way, being highlighted by this Kashmir crash. And from the second half of the verse, we transition into this short build-up towards the second climax, which we do by accelerating our kick pattern, adding a building snare roll, and using a Kashmir uplifter. And I'm also using Frank Pohl's free emulation of Endless Smile by Dada Live to create even more hype by gradually high-passing the build-up, and I'm also applying this subtle trick where I'm slightly decreasing the master volume with this automation clip to make the climax that follows hit harder. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, I'd like to announce the winner of last week's plugin giveaway. I'm really thankful for all your amazing recommendations, and I'm happy to announce that the winner of the contest is this comment, meaning that Ayush will receive a free copy of FabFilter 1 and that I will make a how to produce like Avicii video in the near future, as he has been a major inspiration throughout my music career. Now, back to our song, I'd like to zoom in on one specific technique that is crucial in any electronic or Skrillex song, which is sidechaining. And to illustrate the concept, picture this. You and a friend are having a conversation outside and a loud car passes by. Now, naturally, you would pause your conversation for a moment until the car passes, so that you can continue talking without the interruption of the loud noise. Sidechaining works in a similar way, as it briefly decreases the level of one signal while allowing another to pass through. And in audio production, this concept is particularly relevant for two signals that compete for the same space in the frequency spectrum, like a kick and a bass, who are both heavy in low frequencies. If we play these signals together without doing anything, we may end up in a situation where one element is in the way of the other and where they are clashing, and we don't want that. Now, in our specific example of a kick-bass relationship, the sub-bass prevents the kick from nicely cutting through. Which is why we want to make sure that the level of the sub-bass decreases whenever the signal of the kick is played, just like we pause our conversation every time a car passes by. So we're going to sidechain our kick to our sub in FL's mixer, and in this dedicated sidechain plugin on the sub's channel called Trackspacer, which is an intelligent multi-band sidechain compressor, we are going to select the kick as our sidechain trigger. And this is doing two things. First, whenever our kick signal plays, our sub bass instantly becomes quieter in order for the kick to come fully to light. And second, as soon as our kick signal is done playing, our sub bass immediately returns at full force. Now, an amazing feature of Trackspacer specifically is that you can set these low and high cut knobs if you only want a specific frequency range of your sound to duck whenever a sidechain trigger plays. And in turn, by intelligently analyzing the sidechain trigger's signal, the plugin will carve out the part of your sound that would otherwise clash with this sidechain trigger signal. So how does that actually work? Well, in our song, both our growling bass synth and our sub bass have lots of low frequencies. So I want to make sure that the low frequencies of the growling bass synth make space for the low frequencies of the sub bass whenever the two play simultaneously. So here's what we're going to do to achieve that. We sidechain the sub to the growl's mixer channel. On the growl's channel, we open Trackspacer and select the sub as the sidechain trigger. We then set the high cut knob to about 120 Hz, meaning that Trackspacer will only look at frequencies between 20 and 120 Hz when deciding what part of the growl should be carved out. And finally, we set the attack time as fast as possible at 0.01, meaning it takes 0.01 milliseconds for Trackspacer to start carving low frequencies in response to the sub signal. And in turn, I set the release time slightly slower to make sure that the growl's low frequencies gradually recover to their original state when the sub signal stops playing. Now, because I think Trackspacer is an amazing sidechain tool and because sidechaining is a very useful technique, I'm giving away a free copy of this plugin. All you have to do to have a chance of winning is share your favorite production or mixing trick in the comments below, and I'll be announcing the winner during next week's video. So we've discussed our verse and build-up, meaning we're approaching the second climax. And this is where I wanted to do something that felt familiar, though also fresh. Now, for a sense of familiarity, we have our chord step from earlier that now acts as a pre-fill right before the chorus hits. And we're layering this with another growl lead and the synth layer from Serum. And on our master, we have free clip, which is free by the way, which we are activating through an automation clip only during the chord step pre-fill. And using another automation clip within this plugin, we are decreasing its clip ceiling, which in turn creates this really distorted effect we hear that I'm using to create this oddly weird distorted fill effect. Now, after this crazy fill, I'm introducing a new element, which is this percussive lead from the Noisia sample pack on Splice, which I altered quite heavily through Manipulator using the Octavus preset, which increases the pitch of the sample while simultaneously shifting down its formant. And this basically transforms our sample from just a percussion sound to an actual lead. And as we layer this lead with some of the elements we have previously discussed, we obtain a second drop that feels somewhat familiar and yet has this surprise element through the introduction of our percussive lead. And with the introduction of our percussive lead and the second climax, we've reached the end of this week's video. Now, before we listen to the final result, I'd encourage you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you've enjoyed this video. And also be sure to download the free project file, the stems and the MIDI files down below to study everything at your own pace. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.
Ain't nothing in this world that's stopping me. My Rari outruns your Odyssey. Ain't nothing in this world that's stopping me. My Rari outruns your... Look at me. runs your odyssey. Your odyssey.